Hello and welcome back. My name is Sean and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I wanted to get into the power scheme of the Cosmere. More specifically, I wanted to talk about twin-born compounding. And if that doesn't make any sense to you and you're just fresh into this series, just a heads up, I will be spoiling some major plot points of Mistborn Era 1, talking a bit about Mistborn Era 2, and there will be some tie-ins into the Stormlight Archive series as a whole. So if you don't want to have any spoilers and experience all that fresh, this is your chance to get out. But if not, let's just go ahead and dive into today's topic. So to really break it down to very simple terms, Allomancy is the magical system where you can ingest certain metals and you have the ability to burn them or draw power after you have eaten them to give you a certain set of powers. Say you ate a piece of pewter, for example, and then you burned it. Then that pewter would grant you extra strength. Your whole power and magical output was directly correlated with how much metal that you would ingest, but just very basics. The metal is the source of the power, the output is pretty steady. In Feruchemy, however, you can really just compound what your natural senses and abilities are. So the metal acts as a storing device. So if you were wearing a pewter ring or whatever, you would be able to put your physical strength into there. And Feruchemy is kind of a net neutral system, so you could spend a day being half as strong as you normally would. Your body would literally contract to whatever that signification would be, so 50% less strength in there, and you could walk around very frail for a day and have all that strength stored into the ring. And then at any notice, depending on how much of that physical strength that you have pushed into that ring and for how long, then you could either choose to burn it all in like a minute and basically Hulk out and just gain massive amounts of muscles, go on a rampage to be strong, or you could choose to do that slower and say spend like a week at like 120%. Really, the duration and the amount of whatever attribute you have stored, you can put it in that metal mind and use that in whatever output that you want to do. What makes Feruchemy so kind of dangerous and powerful though is that there is no limit to really how much you compound it. Say you sat there for 10 years just putting away like half of your strength away. Well, you could use that in all burst if you technically wanted to. There are also some guardrails that you can just completely skip over just by trying to do too much with it. But when you have one of each, then there's this really cool combination thing called compounding that you can do. And you can only do it if that you have that overlap in the same metals that you can burn as an Allomancer and that you can use as a Feruchemist. So remember, with Allomancy, you are burning the metal to gain the power, and Feruchemy, you're storing whatever power normally from yourself. But let's say you were a pewter Allomancer and a pewter Feruchemist. Then rather than just make yourself weaker in order to store that power for later, you instead can burn that metal, the pewter, and store whatever comes out of that pewter into your metal mine to be used later. Now you don't get to double dip on this, so whatever metal you are using to burn, you can't suddenly use for Feruchemy, but you basically have an infinite source for whatever that metal would be, so you can amplify your feruchemical powers to an absurd degree because you're no longer reliant on being able to store whatever that you have naturally in your body. Think about it this way, there is a power Feruchemy with gold that allows you to basically heal yourself. And gold as a power generally is pretty useless, but you can burn gold to store basically unlimited health, and that's one of the villains in Mistborn Era 2, where he effectively becomes unstoppable or slightly immortal because he could always just heal himself no matter what the injury. Fun fact, they determined that he could effectively hold his breath forever just because the hypoxia and cell damage that would be done through just not getting oxygen into your lungs and to your bloodstream could be overcome with the compounded effect of that gold. So it is a very powerful type of combination thing. And that's really what I want to talk about today, because in both systems there are guardrails that make this a safe and balanced type of magic system where, you know, they can competitively compete against each other and aren't going to be like meta-breaking, you know, magic systems that can completely derail the plot and whatever congruence the series has. So I wanted to dive into some of what I thought were some of the more interesting combinations, mainly because of some of their limits and setbacks and also the possibilities, but there are 256 different combinations of these different powers, and you bet your ass I'll be getting into more of these and doing what I find interesting. Now, I do want to say that in this video, I will be staying away from all the god medals. Those add extra ones and are their home world dagger worms in the Cosmere that I just really don't want to address right now. And also there are some spiritual metals that haven't really been explored yet with how they would be compounded or used as ferrochemically in the books, where we know technically what their power is, but we haven't seen any real example of it. So I want to stay away from those right now. I will probably do a video in the future of some of these metals like Electrum, Nigrosyl, or Duralumin, and really just dive into what they could be, but for this video I wanted to stay on specifics and target. So in no real given order what I find the most interesting, let's dive into some interesting compounding combinations. Now while I said that I wanted to stay away from all the spiritual metals and spiritual hybrid metals, there was one in particular that I couldn't resist actually wanting to dive into, and that is chromium. Basically for chromium, the ferrochemical effect that it has, you can store and use luck and fortune. That's such a vague thing to actually want to be able to store, and within the Cosmere itself there are some weird connections that fortune has to the spiritual realm that it seemed like a really cool concept that you could basically create infinite fortune. And especially as something that happened in the Mistborn Era 1 book, Sazed actually mentioned to Vin that there was a religion that believed that there was a finite amount of bad luck in the world, and that whenever anything bad would happen to you, then it would be a good thing, because that meant that you have just used up some of the bad luck that you had remaining in the world. Every little bit of bad thing that happens to you means that there is less bad things that can happen to you in the future, which to me says that there's possibly a closed system. So if someone can go in and just create infinite luck in that system just to have whatever happen, then that is an absurdly overpowered power. In the Stormlight series, I won't say who the characters were, but there was a godlike being who talks to a character that made kind of a deal with the devil, and in that he gained the ability for one night to be able to essentially predict the future. And this godlike being was saying like, wow, this is actually pretty impressive that you managed to predict the future so accurately, especially without the use of fortune. And that means that fortune probably has some really close ties to being able to see the future. Part of this has to do with how Brandison set up his spiritual realm, where it's a lot more fluid and you can have echoes of things to come. So I think the general mechanic is that you have the ability to see the different possibilities and see the probabilities of those possibilities happening. And if you can control luck and fortune with something like probability, then not only do you start to get that power of just being able to know exactly what happens, but you can affect those probabilities around you. It's like in that Deadpool movie with that one girl who powers with luck, and they were making fun of her for like, what kind of power is that? And she basically just waltzes through everything and has like just random chance completely work for her. I mean, that is just an absolutely absurd power. And you could actually compound that into really absurd levels. Now, I can't think of any major drawbacks to actually having infinite luck or fortune, other than the fact that life probably would become very boring because you need the good with the bad to have it actually be worth anything. But in the Stormlight series, Hoid, one of the main characters, or Wit, lets one of the characters know not to trust any visions that would come from fortune. So even though that this could potentially let you see the future, there are some hidden mechanics that we don't know about that definitely have their drawbacks. And this one I just thought was interesting and wanted to cover into it just for the sheer possibility of it. Everything else is slightly more concrete. So concrete that we're going to get into pewter. So I mentioned in my earlier example of what pewter was. If you use it as a ferrochemist, then you have the ability to store and use that strength in much more exponential bursts. And if you can burn the pewter for your ferrochemy, then basically you have an unlimited store of your physical power and prowess. And to me, that is hilarious. In the books, when you see a ferrochemist do that, he'll go from like a very scrawny small person to basically a hulking monster just very quickly. And you know, the stature, the muscles, everything just absurdly grow, and you just literally have the power to turn into the Hulk on a given notice. Before, you had the limitation of like, oh well, you can't be like 100% frail. You're walking around as a ferrochemist. That determines sort of the pain of how do you actually want to gather this power. You know, one ferrochemy that's not related to pewter has to do with like storing your eyesight. So if you want to have like hyper good eyesight for a little while, you have to, you know, be half blind while you're storing it, or need glasses for a long period of time in order to have that attribute transfer. So burning pewter into the ferrochemy means that you can basically Hulk out whatever you want. Absolutely just an awesome power to have. Now, the limitations on this is what really made it exciting to me, because yeah, hulking out super strength, like that's interesting, but every kind of power system you see, that's a very common power. But with these, there are two real major drawbacks to it. One is that you don't just become stronger in your own body like you would with pewter. Your physical size actually contorts and your muscles grow and your stature gets bigger and bigger with more strength that you're tapping. And it has been confirmed that you could literally become a muscle balloon and get so big and strong that you would not be able to move. So I just really like the idea of someone about to go full on Hulk mode, jump out into a giant like muscle vapor where they couldn't move anything just because of the sheer size of their biceps and their lats, and then proceed to be a muscle cloud unable to do anything. These type of drawbacks I think are what like actually still make it exciting. There's some like chemological uses of this in Mistborn where you have like the Colossus that are going around and they keep growing and growing, and they're basically using these pewter spikes in order to do something, but that's its own like video of how like chemalurgy works. But they have this issue where they're constantly like splitting their skin and getting bigger and bigger, which makes me think that even though you have some natural protection built in with how big that you get, if you tap enough of it, you could probably just like rip yourself completely out of your body. So don't do that. Next up is zinc. In ferrochemical terms, zinc allows you to store mental speed. This is an interesting one. So if you were, say, not a compounder and you were using zinc and you wanted to store your mental speed for later, it's not like everything slows down for you. Like if someone was talking to you and you decided that you wanted to store up half your mental capacity for use of later, then you would understand technically everything someone would talk to you. They wouldn't be in slow motion, but the speed at which you would able to be process that information and understand what was happening would be extremely reduced, and it would just take you longer and longer to actually understand what was happening and to connect the dots and put it together. And so when you have the ability to basically have infinite mental processing power, then that is absurdly overpowered. I think that's one of the most powerful things that you could have in there. Now, in Allomancy, they have certain god metals that allow you to predict the future and stuff, but my thoughts are that if in the middle of a fight you can process everything as they're happening, you don't have to really sit and mull on things. You can literally just, faster than anyone else can do anything, formulate plans, make decisions, and like make full on like, I'm gonna do this to every one of your opponent's thoughts. Then that's pretty crazy, and that is really overpowered. What really interested this to me, other than the fact that this would be one of the better powers I think that you could have, is that users of it normally report being super hungry after using it. So that means to me that while you're using higher mental processing power and you have whatever's built-in safeguards for your mind, you're still expending a lot of energy, and your calorie expenditure probably goes shoot through the roof. That really upped the stakes for me, because I would imagine someone who would get so adapted and used to using that power for basically everything. Why wouldn't you want to be like as smart and process everything as fast as possible? But the more you use it and the more times you spend slow, then the more likely you are going to die of starvation. It's that idea that you have the ability to basically be a genius at all given points, process everything really fast, you just have this really crazy power, but you're just constantly burning your metabolism to a point where, you know, if you continuously decide to stay a genius, then you will starve to death. And then there was just the idea of like, what if you did have a zinc compounder and he was aware of its limitation? So, you know, his whole thing was like constantly trying to be as fat as possible, just constantly stuffing food down his face, drinking olive oil, doing whatever he could do just to always have that advantage. It was just an interesting like limitation to that power. Next up is steel. Steel, when you use it in a ferrochemical sense, it basically allows you to store speed, not mental speed, physical speed. So if you wanted to walk around at 20% of your normal thing all day, just taking your time getting place to place, then you would be able to be the Flash for a few seconds that next day. And so when you have the ability to just basically burn steel and then be able to turn that into pure just physical speed, that's extremely overpowered. The Flash has always been one of the more overpowered superheroes in my mind in the comic book universe, and to be able to have a portion of that in this universe is pretty crazy. If at the moment you have a bad guy or a fight, you're able to basically just like speed way faster than they can process and stab them a bunch of times, well, for combat and a bunch of other reasons, you could see where the advantage of that would be. Same with like crossing certain distances, and There are some limitations to this, so you can't go faster than light, and while you do have some degree of air resistance and an ability to withstand certain Gs, if you go fast enough, especially if you are compounding, then there is a point where the friction won't save you anymore and you will just burn yourself into a crisp of that type of speed. But going that fast up until there is still an absurd amount of power. Now, the limitation that really stood out to me was that there is no mention of this improving your mental faculty and speed. It's all physical. So we hear about when the edge dancers first start going, you know, they're trying to figure out how to slide and deal without the lack of friction. Then with the edge dancers trying to deal with the lack of friction and using that power in general, it's very messy. Now, if you have that same thing but with steel, judging distances, being able to know when to stop, even coordinating at such a higher speed, that's just such a overwhelming task. The idea is that, you know, you can look at someone from there, go full speed and try to like attack them, but like, you know, you're just in it as a guess as the rest of them. If you're running full speed trying to make it from one town to the next and there's suddenly a wall or a tree in the way and you're going too fast to react, then it's like you could easily splatter yourself as well. So there's a lot of weird limitations on this, and I think you could write it in such a way where it'd be pretty entertaining of just someone who has the speed of the Flash, but not the processing power of the Flash. There's a weird limitation that goes there. Yes, you could use it, you could speed up things, and that could still be super overpowered in a bunch of different contexts. Imagine you're throwing a punch and then you just decide to use your speed, and next thing you know, that thing's traveling like the sound of like Mach 1. But I feel like just you don't have certain protections of other things, so you do have to be aware of the physical damages that could happen to your body, and then just the not having the mental wherewithal to really like channel that power effectively. Now, next up and the last one is iron, and I think this may be one of the more non-spiritual metals that I found the most interesting. Iron lets you store your mass into the metal mine. Now, this is explained by iron feruchemy being able to disrupt the Higgs boson field, and basically the connection between like mass and matter and weight. By having iron affect that, the idea is that you can store your mass inside of there without actually changing your matter. So it will let you have either more or less an effect in that boson field, which basically determines like, you know, your drag slash, you know, the freedom of ability to move inside that field. So there's a lot of weird physics breaking things in here that really question it, and it's just, there's a lot of debate online about what you could actually do with this. Fun fact combination too is that with allomancy iron, that's the ability to pull things towards you. So in a traditional compounding sense, you would be able to make yourself as heavy as whatever you need it to be, a skyscraper, a mountain, whatever, and you could pull anything towards you. In a normal allomancy sense, that if you pulled something heavier than you, then you would go flying towards it, which could be useful, could be bad. You pulled something lighter than you, would come towards you. That Twinborn combination in some of the games are called deaders, because the idea is that you can make yourself extremely heavy, sit in one place, and pull something towards you. Well, you're able to pull something way bigger than you probably should have been able to pull, so the next thing you know, you have a literal ton of bricks headed towards you at high speed, and now you can't stop it because you decided to pull an absurd amount of weight towards you. So there is implied that more than one deader has killed himself accidentally just by misusing his powers. Now, with the storing mass thing, that to me is where it gets very interesting. In Mistborn Era 2, there is a scene where Wayne is on top of a couple iron spikes. He's worried about dying, and basically what he does is uses all of the mass that he's stored up basically at once and collapses a skyscraper with it. So you can store a lot of mass in these metal mines, and you can suddenly become very, very, very heavy. With the ability to burn iron at the same time and use that as a store, you're no longer limited by your sheer body weight. You can spend enough time and enough metal filling up metal mines of certain sizes, or maybe you have multiple metal mines. I have no idea what the size of this metal mine might be, what the size limit or weight limit, mass limit of an iron metal mine actually is, but theoretically, if you could get about 300 times the Earth's mass inside these metal mines and suddenly tap it all at once,
you could become a black hole.
And this has not been disproven. It would take a ridiculous amount of power, because according to the word of Brandon, the higher you get up with, the more power you try to put at one time, it does become diminishing returns, but over a course of a time with enough metal and a big enough metal mine, you could become the Singularity, which I think is hilarious. Now there are some built-in like safety nets into here. You can support your own weight as you are doing this. With that example that I gave of Wayne, he was fine with him collapsing the building, but then he wound up breaking his leg, because if you fall down from that height, even with that extra mass, then that's enough for you to break your leg with even a normal amount of mass. But to me, that seems like such an overpowered power where you can literally become a cosmic force of destruction if you are willing and able to just spend enough time actually doing that. We don't know how long it would take, don't know if it's even feasible, or if that would have to be something down the generations to even do. But also the idea too that you can just use weight in a fight is hilarious. Imagine going to like run and drop kick someone, and then suddenly you decide that you want to weigh a literal ton. Well, if you land on top of them, they're dead. Fight's over. I don't know why anyone who had that power, like, why he wouldn't just start like body slamming people and just allowing that weight to like crush his enemies. It could be really well done and absurd if he just like went for it. And we've seen Sanderson do that with certain other characters, certain powers. It would, a lot of potential there, very interesting. Now this is a bit of a longer video, and just so you guys know, this will be a topic I will be diving into a lot more, because there are still 251 more combinations that we can do. I'll probably play around with compounding for a while until we can get to more of the different Twinborn powers, but the main like takeaway for this that really struck with me as I start to dive into this is that there is no way the Lord Ruler should have lost. He was just he was not creative enough with the powers that he was using. I mean, maybe just living that long, you get overconfident, especially just given like the 1,000 years of just like being undefeated. But these combinations can be so game breaking, where I really think that, Brandon Sanderson afterwards had to be like, Feruchemy and Allomancy don't work together well. That's why we can't have any more Mistborns or Feruchemists, because the combinations of the two are just so absurd and crazy. And like, if you had full access to both sets of them, then it just wouldn't be fair. I mentioned Hemalurgy too, so don't you worry. I will be diving into some videos around that, along with some certain characters that revolve around Hemalurgy. I have a few videos planned out with it, but you can expect a lot of Cosmere content coming your way pretty soon, just because I don't have to read books for this. I just have to read the copper mines and the wikis and just ask stupid questions on Reddit and get stupid answers in return. So I'm very excited not to be tied into how funny I can feel in a moment, or having to read 900 pages of Malazan. So hopefully you guys like this, because I will be making a lot more of this content. And if you have any things to add for these compounds, or things that I missed, or things that you think that could be actually really cool use cases of these certain type of combinations, I'm all for it. I found these combinations very interesting, and whenever I found Reddit threads discussing what some of these powers could do, I would get excited. So please share your thoughts and comment down below, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this content. But as always, thank y'all for your time, and take it easy.